you can make a crude shape, and it's not curvy. I mean, this is good for robots and stuff, but it's not curvy at all. I can subdivide lines by drawing one through it, and then I can left-click one part of the line, tap delete, left-click one part of the line, tap delete. Boom. So you can go with that and create any number of vertices you want in a polygonal drawing. Obviously, I can come up here to my paintbrush, which is K, or fill bucket, I'm sorry. Click, drag, delete, K, fill, V, click. I mean, you can do all sorts of fun stuff. But if you want to make a line curvy, if you mouse near a straight line, there's no way in Flash to tell if a line is actually straight or not unless you drag an endpoint. If it remains a line, then it's a straight line. If it doesn't, say for example I have this one curved, it'll bend when you drag the other endpoint. You can make any line into a curved line by mousing near the middle of it, and the cursor will change. If you drag the cursor, you can bow it up, down, or wherever. This is how a quadratic B-spline works. So you can now make any of these shapes curves. And you can try and manually match this up to make it look like whatever the heck you're trying to make it look like. But these points aren't connected. If you left-click any one of these segments, they're not snapped together. To snap these lines together, you have to mouse near one of these points, not the endpoints. A quick way to find them is left-clicking a line. You'll see this little cursor change to the angle. If you drag that, it'll indicate that both of those points exist, and you can snap them together at certain points. See how it has that large circle? I've now snapped them together and they form one continuous smooth curve. I can repeat this process for quite a while. This will be very important later when we're doing vor animations. I may want this line to be sharp, so I don't snap that one together. Blah blah, merge. So I'm literally just left dragging and left dragging and left dragging. That one didn't work the first time. Sometimes they don't work the first time and you'll have to move it around to get them to snap. Always check to make sure they've snapped by left-clicking your line just to make sure. These are just for efficiency purposes, for animation later. When you're making something that you're going to animate with a shape tween, you don't want it to be too detailed. It'll cause problems. So now we generated a head similar to the first one we have, but with smarter control points. With this one, since it was a circle, in order to generate these sharp points, I would literally have to select an area, delete it, and now I have sharp points I can work with. You'll notice you can snap the lines to the fills just the same way you could with the lines. It's a good idea not to work with the fill until you're ready to, so let's do that. So now I can draw mouth shape and bend, 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 snap, snap. If I've snapped all of them together, there just isn't really enough detail there, but it'll work. You can do crazy stuff like this. So, I think I've covered all the basics for drawing simple shapes. If you were just to use the brush, say, which is B, this is if you have a tablet. If you've got a tablet, you can start drawing with it, but it won't look like it's pressure sensitive. There's a little button over here that says use pressure, obviously. Click that sucker. Now when you're over here, you can like draw with pressure sensitivity, which is kind of nice. That doesn't help me much, but that's good for later for coloring. So remember that you have an option for pressure sensitivity if you have a tablet. It won't work on lines. Delete everything we've done so far. Okay, what am I missing? Okay, so we may have been able to draw a simple shape, but that doesn't make a monster. Layers are where we're going to start working. Up here in your timeline, you have a lot of layers. This little button down here will allow you to insert extra layers. I can left-click on a keyframe here, and now I can draw into it. Rectangles or whatever. V, and, well, one frame isn't very useful, is it? But I can now show you what layers do. If I left-click this, or just this layer, I can now draw this red line on top of this layer. Whoop-de-doo. They're completely separate. And again, as I showed you earlier, you can now hide different layers, or you can lock them for editing so that I can only edit certain layers. Which is nice. So working with layers is good for more complicated drawings. If we want to make our dinosaur head, I guess. Let's start with the line method since I use that the most. Remember, it doesn't have to be exact when you draw it, because you're going to be moving it around anyway. Left drag, left drag, left drag, snap, left drag, snap. Smile. Give him way too big of a smile. Now there is a funny thing with Flash. If you bring two lines like this close together into a pinch, if they're not curved, it's not a problem. But if you do have two curvy lines, it's very easy to accidentally move this point so that the curves overlap. Like if I drag this curve down a little bit too much, these two lines are becoming very close together. And if I drag that point around a little bit too much, they'll intersect. Look what happened. It actually cut into two separate pieces. So be wary of that, because it's very easy to do accidentally. So this kind of smile isn't a good idea, so I'm going to delete that end of it for the time being. Should work still. Do left drag with V. V is the selection tool, if I remember right, in Flash terminology. We'll leave the neck as is. Let's say I want to get rid of this line. I can left-click it, delete it, and re-snap something together. Or you can just snap them over the same point. It's kind of convenient. So, if I tried to fill this shape, I can't because it's not closed. I didn't ever close the mouth here, so there's no way the fill can exist. I'd have to close that mouth if I wanted to actually fill it. I can delete it later because the fill actually defines a line that exists. So just like you're manipulating lines, a fill can be manipulated in the same way. So I can mouse over the curves of that fill and move it just exactly the same as lines. There's no difference. That's more useful for when we're doing shading. For example, if I wanted this to be super bright, hurt my eyes red, and I wanted to then draw into it some darkness. That didn't work too well, did it? Flash has an option for the brush tool over here. That's this little blue circle. It's brush mode. You can now paint inside of fills. So if I start painting darkness here, I notice I'm painting way outside the line and stuff. It'll only paint inside of the shape I started painting in. That's one way you can do basic cell shading. Obviously I haven't practiced this technique enough, but that is something you can certainly do. It's better with a tablet, by the way, than a mouse. But if you did this, then again, since it's just lines, you can then go back and manipulate this curve using the selection tool, dragging it around, and making it exactly what you want. Which is how a lot of people get that crisp effect to their art that's vectorized. Now you can do the same exact thing by using lines rather than fills. Because you can just draw a line to connect, you could literally just start drawing lines inside of your fills. And then drag them around with your selection tool to make it whatever shape you wanted. Since the line is actually cutting this fill into two distinct regions, I can now fill the bottom part with a color and then left-click my line and delete it. Same thing. So depending on if you're working with the mouse or with the tablet, these kind of options you need to play with. Alright, back to this thing that I'm not getting far on. Okay. So we have a head clip. Well, in this system, it's probably better if the head and jaw are separate since they're going to be moving independently. So let's do that. I left-click and shift-left-click the second line to select both of them. I'm going to cut them, which can be done with Edit Cut or Control-X. Move one layer down. Paste with Control-V, or right-click Paste. Boom. So now they're on separate layers, which means I can basically complete this jaw clip differently than the head clip. Make that a sort of greenish as always. So now I've made this piece, and now I have this piece on top. If I wanted to complete the head clip, and V, fill. Combined together they look like that. Because I drew a line here, it's kind of confusing. So I want to delete this line, basically. But now I've got this funny little fill issue, too. Since this head part is separate from the layer below it, notice if you click these little colored squares, you can make it transparent. That's really useful, too, for seeing problems. So now I want that to snap to him. Probably don't want these lines there anymore. At all, really. Now I have two pieces. Well, we still haven't done anything interesting with the timeline. So, how do we work with this thing up here? Obviously, we have keyframes of something. Now, the annoying part about Flash's timeline is I don't know of any proper way to work with this thing other than using keyboard shortcuts. The default keyboard shortcuts all revolve around F5. If you click up here on the timeline, so that there aren't any frames selected, you can hit F5. That will insert frames. If you hold Shift and press F5, you can delete frames. And just in case someone's watching this and isn't listening, I can't stress this enough. You'll need to know that forever. Note that if you left drag a range of frames, you can F5 and it will duplicate that range of frames as well. You can also left drag over a region of frames and Shift F5 to delete all of them. So I'm going to hold down F5 for a while. There are different types of keyframes in Flash, basically. But, let's see, delete layer 4. I don't want the data here to be there. So this is your timeline in Flash. I have just drawn graphics data in this. That's not very useful. I can make it what's called a shape tween or a motion tween. For the purposes of the head, you're going to want to probably use a motion tween to start with. So, to make one, you have two options. Again, where we created that MC monster clip in the library, you can just create a new symbol for, like, top jaw, or I guess head would be more logical. And you'll notice there's a head clip that's nothing's in there. I can right-click this keyframe that I've created, copy frames, right-click, paste frames. That's kind of nice. So, I've done that. I'm locking all the layers except for layer 3, which I'm going to now double-click and rename head. And this is going to be double-click jaw. So this part, I've drawn this, I'm just going to delete it. Control A selects everything on the currently selected layers. That's an important one to know. Control A. Control A, delete. Drag the head over here, and look. There's the head movie clip. If I double click it, I'm now editing the head movie clip, which you can see in this scene hierarchy. This is very important to know because that little plus sign right there is the key to the operation. You will not succeed in Flash unless you pay attention to transforms. Now here's how you do that. If I have this thing selected, I want to make sure my window transform is visible. This little guy over here. It tells you the position and scale and rotation and whatnot of your movie clip. So, I can now see the transform information. This little thing where it says symbol position, I want to set these X, Y values to 0. Oh, it's centered, right? You'd think it's centered, but it's not. Because Flash, being the evil program it is, doesn't obey transform conventions. So it's lying to us. It says we're at 0, 0, but that's not the case. The only way to fix this is select your symbol and click the free transform tool, which is Q. That's another key you'll need to memorize. So now you have V, in, and Q. So let's just hit Q, and it'll have these guides. If you mouse over these guides and left drag, you can rotate, you can scale, you can shear, which is kind of a complex thing. You can hold shift and left drag a corner to scale uniformly. It's just kind of all sorts of weirdness. You can scale independently, you can scale uniformly, you can rotate, you can left drag the thing. Whoop-de-doo. So left click away from it to get out of that. You can always just tap V instead. QV, QV, QV.